Because of the population density, because of the sanitation, it's like a 5-star hotel for the virus.
इसका बुखार बहुत तेज था। जब डॉक्टर से वापस घर आया तो दोनों पाँव उसके काम नहीं करते।
बकाया है अल्लाह दे सो खपल बदन न गुर देगा ना खपल बदन खपल।
If we do not take care of the virus, you can forget about the eradication.
पोलियो वर्कर्स घर घर जाकर बच्चों को इंसदादे पोलियो के कतरे पिला रहे थे।
3 people were shot.
यहाँ पे जो है ना भांजी मेरी आई है, उन्होंने दरवाजे को दस्तक दी है। ये फायर हुआ था ये यहाँ पे।
All 3 are died.
This is not supposed to be a war. These killings come from misconceptions.
باقي كده وجه ده جناكاي ده وقنا مخ بالغ او الکان چې کوم دینو.
The threat to the polio workers is a huge problem.
If it continues like this, then there is a risk for the country and there is a risk to everywhere else.
जगह पे टारगेट किलिंग है हर जगह पे.
To change the perception of those who want to do harm.
It's a very difficult task. It is not an impossible task.
ये program, ये तारीखी है.
The security plan is more robust than anything that you contemplated in the past.
The survival कोलो द पारा जंग दी.
आज से इंशाल्लाह अपना मिशन को जारी सारी रखसा.
और इसमें हम मुकम्मल तौर पर प्रोटेक्शन देंगे अपने रज़ाकार.
हमारा मसीह दुआ है कि अपने पाँव के साथ खड़े हो जाए.
You proved everybody wrong by going back and really immunizing those children.
इंसान जिंदगी दा सीधा लगा हवा चिट्टी रही है ना. अब दी दुनिया गोड़ी हम गाना पा दुनिया में इंशाल्लाह रोको.
और जो लोग इन्हीं चाहते कि बीमारी खत्म हो, वो लोग इंशाल्लाह नाकाम हो जाएं.
Welcome. So it's great to be here talking about this film with you. I watched it a couple of nights ago. It's an interesting film. It's inspiring in many ways, and it ends with a note of hope, but it's also immensely sad and scary. So I just want to ask you, what was it like? How dangerous is that situation for the people there who are facing the decision of whether or not to immunize their children, and for the filmmakers?
Well, first of all, thank you for your very kind reception. Very dangerous, to be truthful. It's close on 70 people who have been killed, who are associated with the polio program. At least 30 of them are the poorest women in society who get paid a couple dollars a day to go into very poor communities and give children a few drops of a vaccine, and they've been gunned down at point blank range. There's a very, very high level of social violence in Pakistan. In Karachi, the papers on Monday morning list everybody killed at the weekend, and there's 65 to 80 murders in the city a weekend that they report. There are probably many more. Police are regularly attacked. So there's a lot of violence in the society. And then you add the Pakistan Taliban violence, and it can be quite severe. So people expect, they live in a world where a lot of killing is going on. Polio is not an isolated case. And I think they tend to learn how to live with this, and they're probably quite fatalistic. Having said that, they are inspirational. And I mean, we had a big debate about the title, and I wanted to have the word heroes somewhere in the title because it reflected, I mean, I think we made the right decision, but it reflected what I feel about these people. And the heroes to me are not simply the Pakistani vaccinators or the various doctors, but also some of the senior administrators. And not normally do you think bureaucrats are heroic, but when I've seen them fight corruption at the level that they fought it, and indifference, and run personal risks, not simply physical ones, but also with your career and so forth. Dr. Dory, who is the head of the program, he has a very, very simple morality. Like, you're either going to contribute to saving children from being crippled for their whole life, or you're in the way.
And so they're you mentioned career, but their lives are in some jeopardy, right, by endorsing these programs.
Yes.
So this violence against the vaccinators, I guess you could call them immunizers, grows out of a decree by the Pakistani Taliban, right? When was that decree made, and what's the motivation for that decree?
It was in early summer 2012, and the immediate instigating element was the revelation that the CIA had a operative, a guy called Zaidi, I believe. He's in prison now as a spy. U.S. is putting pressure to get him out of prison. And he had gone to Osama's hometown and carried out a survey for hepatitis B. That was inaccurately reported in Zero Dark 30 as polio. The CIA should never have been involved in some kind of public health cover for their operations. But this really was simply the straw that made this happen. There are a whole series of reasons. There are 80-some groups in the Pakistani Taliban. They range from moderate Taliban, people that you probably could do a deal with at some point if you found a way to do that, to just people that are just off the scale. To give you an idea of the off-the-scale mentality, in Baluchistan, which is a province south of where most of the film takes place, an extreme Taliban leader had a rally with his supporters, and he held up his 3-year-old daughter, who was crippled with polio, and called her a martyr, and said, "Our children in Pakistan have to keep the polio virus alive, so someday we can reinfect the West."
Wow. So that's fascinating. So the people in the movie talk about there's some people who don't want to have the children immunized, and I was wondering, is it because they fear violence? There's some fear of the violence, certainly for some. There's also legitimate fear that, or I shouldn't say legitimate, they actually fear that the polio vaccine is going to do something terrible to them, right? So is it more about the Taliban exploiting some weakness, or is it there's a legitimate fear by the people there that something might happen to them if they get a kid?
No, I encountered no fear at all that people were afraid of actually taking the drops. That wouldn't motivate them. So many people are being vaccinated, and there's such pressure that the Taliban is not sophisticated enough to establish you've had the drops and you haven't. That's not a meaningful risk. But it's really a complex situation. And if you start, there's two places you could start. The first is you could say, look at vaccination campaigns around the world. Every single vaccination campaign in the history of vaccination has had groups of people who resisted the vaccination campaign, and that applies to the U.S.
Exactly, right here in the U.S. still.
And you still have it now, and in London you have the MMR vaccine. And it is sociologically to do with people that distrust central government. You can't have vaccination campaign work unless you have what they call herd immunity, which you need a high proportion of people immunized so that those who aren't won't catch it because it can't spread through the population. Polio needs to be around 93%. I think measles is 86. I mean, you're the science expert.
I don't know the exact
I think they're roughly the figures. To get 93%, you need to immunize an awful lot of people over a long period of time. That has to be done by central government. If you have issues with the central government, if they're not fixing the roads, if they're not letting you vote, if they're abusing your children, or if they're not providing medical care or education, or you're in conflict with them, and they come along and want to vaccinate your kids, you tell them to back off, right? And it's that resistance to centralized programs which is where it starts. Then you take it from another perspective. It's the Pashtun people, which are the people along the mountains, the people that populate both Afghanistan and the mountains of the tribal areas. And these people have been in conflict with, first, the British Empire. As early as 1880s, the British had a policy because they were constantly being raided by the fighters up along this border, and Pakistan was India at this point, and the official policy was called butcher and bolt. And if a group of men came out and raided a village or attacked a town or, you know, a supply convoy or something, the British would send a battalion up into the mountains, and that battalion would be ordered to find a village, kill everybody in the village, and then bolt, split. And this is what you get if you come down out of the mountains. Now, this is how they tried to control the border 130, 140 years ago. It is no wonder now that all this time later, these people are alienated from us.
Well, let's back up a bit. I don't want to give a medical lesson here, but sure. Polio has been was eradicated in the U.S., I believe, in the 70s, late 70s or so. Yeah. So tell us briefly about what polio is and why it's such a scary disease.
Well, it's a terrifying disease because it can spread so incredibly easily. One of you could be touring in Pakistan in the morning, Peshawar, drink a glass of water out of the tap because of poor sanitation conditions. You've imbibed the polio virus. You get on a plane, and 12 hours later, you actually deposit it into the New York sewage system. Now, because the U.S. has very robust systems and sewage doesn't end up in drinking water, you don't get polio. Right? Cairo has had polio in its sewage systems for a better part of a decade. Nobody's got ill, thankfully. But a strand, the virus mutates roughly every 6 months, and they can track all these different strands, and they find it and they can track it. And in Sindh, which is southern province of Pakistan, a mutation occurred in 2012. Within 18 months, it was discovered in China, Tajikistan, Somalia, Egypt, Israel, the West Bank, Iraq, and Syria. It just boom, off it went, right? And it crippled some 36 children in Iraq and Syria. So it spreads like wildfire. It's so much more volatile than Ebola. Right? Now, Ebola is a deadlier disease. 200 people have polio, carry polio, or infected with polio for every person that becomes crippled. So when you had 400 cases of polio in Pakistan last year, you had 80,000 people who were infected with polio, right? And it travels like that. So that's why it's so dangerous.
And so I guess it's principally led by the World Health Organization, this desire to eradicate polio worldwide, as has been done with with smallpox, I guess, is the big example of a big dread disease. That's
the only example.
Well, I think okay. So that's the model.
Yeah.
And to some extent, is it Pakistan uniquely holding that dream hostage in some sense, or is it the region?
No, it is Pakistan now. When the film was made, which is, we finished production, we were still in the cutting room this time last year. There were three countries, Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. The Afghan endemic polio is really just a spillover for the Pakistani border. It really is Pakistan and Nigeria. The last reported case of polio in Nigeria was on my birthday last July. I remember it very clearly the day. And there's been not another reported case. And so they think, no one's going to say officially, and it'll be another 2 years before they actually announce it if it is the case, but they think they've got it out of Nigeria. And there's a real ironic reason why that occurred. The area of infection was in the Bora region, which is where Boko Haram operate, and they couldn't get vaccinators in. Boko Haram violence got so extreme that virtually the whole population of Boro just fled. You just couldn't stay. And they put up vaccination centers on the border, and the people came out, they vaccinated everybody. And so they were able to hit the population with a vaccination program because the population was fleeing such terrible violence. So that's a positive side to a very negative reality. And they think that may have done it.
So I just wanted to, we're going to open up to questions in a bit, but I want to ask you, you've directed films on a number of topics, I think communism in Europe and manhood in Africa, I was reading, and so I'm wondering, what was it about this story that made you want to tell it?
Well, I got a phone call 2 summers ago. They were looking for a filmmaker who had sort of my work profile. I work in a lot of dangerous places, and I know how to operate. And the trick of working in dangerous places is to avoid the danger. It's not about finding the danger. It's about how to operate close to a fire but not actually go in the fire and know what the limits are. So it's not about bravery. It's about being sensible in those environments. And they were looking for someone. And my initial response was Why would I want to make a film about something that's already over? When I looked into it, two things really intrigued me. One is that the world isn't really clued into how quickly, if this gets out, it'll just sweep through populations. And one of the ironies of the U.S. epidemics, and the U.S. had the worst epidemics of polio in the 20th century, was because you had such a good health system here. You had a good, not health system, a good hygiene system. You had very clean water. And so nobody had any immunity. So everybody could catch the illness. Why older people don't get it is because they often had it when they were young. They were one of the 200 but didn't get crippled. So they will never get polio again. And that acts as a bulwark against it spreading rapidly. Well, in America, no one had ever had polio because the sanitation systems were so good. So when it did get out, everybody got hit with it and got hit very badly. So I think they've stopped vaccination in America. Well, your sanitation systems are probably robust enough to stop it, but if it did get out here, you've got no protection. I mean, a large number of people are going to go down with it. So that's intriguing, you know, that we've been lulled into a sense of security when we really don't deserve to have that sense of security. The second is that I've always been interested in development in the third world, and how do you bring progressive development? Well, the polio vaccination program sits right at that nexus of all the social problems, all the political problems, all the corrupt problems, all the military problems of a country that's in the news every day. And what's interesting about the campaign, this is the reason why, I mean, I've become a real advocate of the campaign, but they are teaching Pakistani government bureaucrats how to be efficient, how to monitor your local operations, how to make sure the areas are properly covered, how to organize it. And they've set up all these skill systems. And a large part of the polio program is to teach bureaucrats how to be effective in a social program. And you measure success by, for example, you set up a series of meetings that you have to have before you have vaccination day, and you monitor who comes to the meetings. And you have a list of people who come, and if you get 95% attendance of all the different groups at every meeting, you're going to have a very efficient program. But if 60% or 40% or some groups don't come, you know they won't be there on the day, and it won't be effective. And so they're trying to teach these skills. Well, the polio program is actually altering the professionalism of Pakistani government officials at low levels. So there's lots of byproducts to this, and I find that fascinating.
You know, it's particularly the sad aspect of the film is kind of amplified because not only the tragedy of the violence and of the disease itself, but also when people do get polio and are crippled by it, they don't have a lot of options. You saw on the screen here just now this guy who was a beggar and who had this really crazy looking contraption. I hope I don't give anything away, but you all, I think, pitched in and got him a motorized cart. Tell us a bit about him briefly, and have you kept in touch with him?
Well, I mean, I haven't personally kept in touch. I don't speak his language, but my team, and by the way, everyone on the film who worked on the production in Pakistan was Pakistani except myself, and that's one of the things that I don't know if it distinguishes me, but one of the ways I work, which is I go into a country and I seek the local talent, and you can see how beautifully shot it is. Well, this guy had never shot a documentary before. He's a professional, does news, but I looked long and hard until I found, and of course, what was interesting, I had 45 shooting days and I expected it would take me 15 to get him to the standard I wanted to work. He was there on the first day, effectively. He was waiting for his opportunity, and I came along and gave it to him, and he just took off with it, right? So, you know, my team is there, and they're in touch, and they see Habib now and again, and so forth, and his life has been revolutionized by the vehicle that he has. He has a motorized vehicle. And we put a lot of pressure on WHO, and they don't normally, because there are 500,000 people on the streets of Pakistan who've had polio. I mean, there's no money to provide that kind of support, but in our case, we managed to convince them that he was a needy case. I don't know what the question, I forget the question.
That was just kind of curious to know how I was doing. I want to ask you another question too, but I thought this might be a good time to open up the questions. So, shall we do that?
Hi, regarding, you were speaking about in documentary filmmaking, you're one of the people that goes in there and really delves in. So I was wondering if you could talk about some of the ways in which you keep yourself safe in a very precarious situation.
Well, a very long time ago in in Argentina the day after the war. In fact, my bald spot, I had a bald spot, and I have a big spot. My bald spot was broadcast at the top of the news, every news channel in the world. My bald spot. It was the beginning of the news, ABC, NBC, CBS, everywhere in the world, because I was defending the camera, which is a BBC camera, I was a BBC employee at the time, and we were attacked by 1,000 people, and we escaped with our lives by that much. And I'd made every single mistake that you could make. If you want to sit down and do a course about how to keep your team safe, I violated every one of those. I was untrained. I had an American passport. I was working with the BBC. You couldn't get into Argentina with a British passport. I got sent in untrained. I nearly got people killed. At the very last minute, I stepped in and saved the life of my sound man, instinctively. And I discovered that under extreme pressure of threat, I somehow get really calm. It's really strange. And I know of a whole series of incidents where things have occurred and people have panicked, and I just see the solution, right? So that gave me confidence. But in reality, like I say, what you're trying to do is avoid danger. And I make the point to you right now, I think I look at everybody in this room, and there will be some place in this city where if you go that evening to a bar or something and say the wrong thing, get fairly drunk, you could, well, certainly be beaten badly and maybe end up dead, right? And you know the city well enough, so you're never going to go there. And you know when you're there, it's not a good place to be, and you leave, right? Or when you go to a foreign country, you don't have this knowledge. You don't know whether one bar is dangerous or not dangerous, right? You rely upon local people. So the trick is not for me to know how to do it, but to find the people that really can be trusted. And that's, I think, my skill, that I have a whole profile and a way I test people that I'm going to trust. And I watch their reactions under stress and pressure and so forth and test their local knowledge. And it's like a personal test that they have to pass. And then I hire them. And then I rely very, very heavily on their information. And I could give you an anecdote. I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but it was in Nicaragua. It was 1965. I was making a film for the BBC about the Contra War. All these guys were in flash cars and fancy suits hanging around the Intercontinental, and American crews were hiring these guys who were providing all these services. And I just stuck in my throat. I thought, some guy in a fancy suit, he doesn't get his hands dirty. He doesn't know what life is like on the ground. And I hired a guy who was relatively inexperienced, but really seemed to be the right guy. We're heading down a road way up in the mountains, dirt road. We come to a fork. We're going to a village that was attacked the day before. Which way to go, left and right, no road signs or anything like this. He gets out, there's a peasant coming down, he's carrying all this, you know how they cut grass and take it home to by the roadside and take it home to and he asked him which way to go, and we could all see the peasant pointed to the right fork. And the guy comes back and sits in the car, and I said, okay, let's go. And he said, just a minute. And I said, what do you mean, just a minute? And he goes, I don't know. I said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, he looked at me. I said, he what? He said, he looked at me, he gave me a funny look. I said, he gave you a funny, what do you mean a funny look? He said, I don't know, he just gave me this look. Well, what did the look mean? I don't know what it meant. Well, what do you mean you don't know what it meant? The look was disturbing. And I looked at this guy, and he looked at me, and I thought, okay, we'll go left. The next day, a truck goes down the right fork, hits a mine, and blows up. Okay? Now, when I thought about it, you're the peasant. You're carrying this load on your back. You know there's a mine on the road. Some guy stops you on the road and says, which way to this town? Right? If he says, don't go down that road, there's a mine in it, and you're working for the government, he'll be slammed into that car with a gun to his head, tortured until he gives information about how he found out, right? And possibly killed. If, on the other hand, you're with the opposition who put the mine down there, the guy will be shot on the spot for giving away important information. The peasant has no choice but not to tell you, right? But the peasant was deeply disturbed by not telling us, and that was in his face. And my guy saw that. And from this point on, you look very, very, you smell the air and you look around and you sense danger. And when you sense it, you turn around and you get out of there. And that's how you survive.
Another question?
Long way around.
Hi, good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you very much for bringing up this story, because I have a personal connection to it. My father's a polio survivor. And so in seeing this, I'm wondering what kind of call to action can there be on our part, since in the U.S. we have been, not exposed to it, and it's become sort of a forgotten thing. And there was a huge reaction when Ebola started to come to the U.S. So, polio could be so much worse than that. What can we do to close the gap in eradicating this, since Pakistan, it may be the last frontier for it, and keeping that safety in mind for everyone?
Well, I just say go see the film and tell everybody about it. Look, it's in relatively good hands. They're trying to raise quite a few $1 billion, and I'm not sure you'll be able to help out a great deal on that front. Rotary International, the Bill Gates Foundation, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi are some of the big funders. The UN obviously is a big funder. There isn't much you can do here except in terms of, kind of low-grade political thought, talk to people about the dangers, make people aware that this anti-science attitude, which we now see in all kinds of areas, we see it in the climate change debate, let's ignore scientific evidence, let's let our prejudices and narrow-minded and political choices dominate as opposed to scientific knowledge. So in a sense, I think in the broader sense, we have to fight the battle of policy needs to be evidence-based. We have to have government policy based upon real, impartial, factual evidence and not our own prejudice or political orientation. But I mean, you could write letters and you could encourage people. That is very, very useful.
What else? Time for one more question.
This question is actually from Periscope, and they're interested in knowing what are the ages that are affected most by polio, and is it more severe for children than adults or older adults? Who's affected the most?
In Pakistan, they really only give drops. They will give drops to anybody who asks for it, but basically the target is under 5. And it's a combination of, basically how you get polio is that you have it in your gut. It's an infection of the gut, okay? And as long as it doesn't cross out of the gut into the bloodstream, you won't get crippled, because it goes into the spinal column and actually kills, literally kills. If you cut a victim's spine in half, and they do this when they do autopsies, you see a little black dot. Well, the black dot is a dead tissue that maybe is inches or this long, right? And children are more susceptible to that. Their systems are less robust. But you can get at any age, but mainly it's children under 5.
Okay, well, it's an interesting movie. You've just seen a piece of it here, so check it out. And tell us, by the way, where can they see this? Where's this movie going to be opening?
The IFC, it's opening the IFC tomorrow. If you're in LA, I don't know the name of the cinema in LA. Someone's going to wave to me. But it opens on the 12th of June in LA, and there'll be several other cities, but we're waiting for the schedule to be announced. Tomorrow night, IFC, I think it runs for a week.
Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.